So I'm Alyson Gerber. I am the author of Braced, Focused, and my new book, which came out on May 18th, is called Taking Up Space. I write books that are own voices. So all of my books are based on my own experience in the world, my lived experience. The plots are not real. What happens in my contemporary middle grade novels, it's not what really happened in my life, but the feelings are all real. So I wore a back brace for scoliosis for 2.5 years. I had undiagnosed ADHD, which then was diagnosed, and now I'm a person living with ADHD. And I am in recovery for disordered eating. Disordered eating is the focus of my new book, Taking Up Space, which is about Sarah, a 7th grade basketball player who is struggling to feel good about her body and herself. And disordered eating, in case maybe some of you aren't familiar with what that term is, it's not a medical diagnosis. It's just a way that we can talk about compulsive dieting, struggles with binging and restricting, and any time that food is sort of being manipulated to make you feel better or worse or to impact your emotions. It's not just to eat when you're hungry. And the cool thing about Taking Up Space is that it's also about basketball, and it's also about a cooking competition, and it's about friendship and crushes and family, and how food and family can be complicated. But ultimately, I think it's a really fun read. So I'm excited to talk to you about all my books, but I'm especially excited to talk about Taking Up Space.
Well, that is the one I have been enjoying today. Just finished about 30 minutes ago.
Amazing.
Fresh in my head. And I guess my first question is, have you eaten Doritos recently?
You know what's so funny is I was thinking to myself, with all the launch events I've done over the last week, I was like, how is it possible that I've not bought a bag of Doritos? Like, I had a whole plan to go to this, there's a store down the street that sells all the different kinds. And Sarah and I don't necessarily agree on the flavor that we like. I'm a Cool Ranch kind of girl. But I was like, how have I not made it to the store? So that's one of my goals for the next couple of days, is to make it to the store down the street to get some Doritos.
That was one of the big things I took away from the book, is Alyson Gerber really likes Doritos. Sarah really likes Doritos. But man, they come up frequently.
I do love Doritos. I do.
If anybody at the Dorito company is listening, read this book and then send Alyson all the free Doritos.
Hashtag partner.
Well, let's see. Let's start with the book, and then we'll talk about ADHD and how that impacts your writing and all kinds of great stuff, and probably flying saucers and ghosts. The Steve audience knows what kind of show this is. But let's talk about Taking Up Space. So this is based on some of your own experience, and you had written near the back of this book that you're hoping that this book is going to help readers recognize how much they matter and see that if something negative is taking up space in their minds, even if there isn't a name for it, they should ask for help. So what kind of negative things are we talking about?
So I think what I mean by that is, I know what I mean by that. What I mean by that is, what I mean by that is, oftentimes I think, at least this has been my experience, and I know I've seen other people do this too, is when you have a problem or something that's going on with you that doesn't have a name, you can't sort of define and say, like, I'm experiencing depression right now. I'm experiencing the side effects of my ADHD, something that we can really like claim and name and put a label on. It feels like that pain, the pain that's like the almost, doesn't matter. And that's not true. It does matter. But it's very easy for other people to dismiss that pain and sort of, I hear that a lot, especially right now in the pandemic, a lot of people saying, well, yes, yeah, that might be a problem, but also you're lucky, or a lot of comparative suffering. And I think that pain gets diminished. And one of the reasons it took me so long to get help for my disordered eating was that I felt like my pain didn't count because I didn't meet enough criteria to be diagnosed with an eating disorder. So I always felt like I was a person who didn't have an eating disorder, instead of being a person who was also in a lot of pain. And your pain doesn't have to be equal to somebody else's pain to count. And I want kids, whatever that pain is, if their pain is sort of below the threshold of a medical diagnosis, that doesn't mean that their mental and physical health isn't suffering. And I want them to know that their pain counts and that they can still get help and still ask for help and still reach out. to get support.
You can certainly, I think everybody can probably relate to that. But I know certainly with hopefully coming out of the pandemic now, knock on wood, if I look over the past year, there's been all sorts of uncomfortable feelings, shall we say. It hasn't been the rosiest, cheeriest time in America. But as I look back, no one close to me died from the disease. Our income level actually improved a little bit. I was able to acquire a PlayStation 5. So when I talk about some depression associated with the pandemic, some extreme anxiety, it is easy to dismiss that a little bit because I know how much so many other people are suffering. And I don't know how much of that is some appropriate perspective, and how much of that is dismissing something negative that is taking up space.
Well, I think it can be both of those things at the same time. I think like your pain you can recognize that somebody else's pain is bigger, that somebody else's loss is bigger. This is what I say to kids a lot, because oftentimes when I'm teaching virtually to kids or I'm doing a school visit, I can tell that they're really bummed that they missed out on a soccer championship, or that they didn't get to compete in this swim meet that they really wanted to compete in because of the pandemic. And they know that loss, that mourning is like not the same as obviously losing a loved one or losing something bigger in their life, but they still feel it. And so to give kids and to give adults, I think we right now especially need it too, to be like, your pain counts. Like whatever, the extreme anxiety counts. Uncertainty causes so much mental anguish and pain, and that can exist in somebody. You can also be able to recognize that somebody else's pain exists and it's bigger, and maybe somebody else's pain exists and you can't quite understand why it's so big, but you can try to understand and empathize. And I feel like we need to sort of create space to empathize for ourselves, to be like, yeah, like this was a hard time, and that uncertainty does something to your brain. I know from wearing a brace for when I got my back brace, they didn't know how long I was going to have to wear it for. They said like until you're done growing. So part of the anguish of wearing the brace was the unknown of when that was going to end, of like not having a marker to be like, I'm like, my goal is this time frame. And that's sort of how the pandemic has felt. For me, it has not been triggering, but it feels very familiar. Like I know how to deal with this type of uncertainty, but I can see why nobody else does, because it's such a strange experience, but it's something I felt before because I felt it when I wore my brace. It's really, so I know, like, I can recognize how painful it is, but I have so many coping mechanisms that I feel like, oh, there's that coping mechanism. Oh, there's that coping mechanism. Great. I'm so glad I developed that to deal with the worldwide pandemic.